Thank you for joining us today for this informative workshop, Reframing Caregiving, part, Care Partner Self-Care, and Why You Should Create a Care Partner Bill of Rights. This is presented by Rhonda Henry, licensed mental health therapist, and offered by Work-Life Benefits at the University of Kentucky. Rhonda, thank you for your time today. Would you like to introduce yourself and get started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hazel. As Hazel said, I'm Rhonda Henry, and I'll move into there we go, what we're going to be covering today as I do my introduction. I've been here within the health and wellness area of UK for a little bit over 10 years around that area. And my background also in my personal life is providing caregiving as well. So I was a caregiver for my dad before he passed away a few years ago. And my mom has been living with us for about 4 years at this point, and I'm her primary caregiver. So I've got my own personal experience, not that that's exactly the same as anyone else's, but I certainly, when I say things like this stuff is complicated, just be aware that I know that from the inside out. So, some of the things that we're going to cover today, we've got about 30 minutes or so together, and then I'm happy to stay for questions as long as we might want to talk or kind of brainstorm through a few things at the end of the content. But we're going to cover kind of two primary things. One is going to be just this Care Partner Bill of Rights, and we're going to be talking about kind of why we call it that, where that's coming from, and really looking at some of those questions. We want to dig in a little bit into like, what do we actually need? What do I need some permission for? Where might I need a boundary? What parts of me feel like they're maybe getting lost kind of in this shuffle? And then we're going to talk about how do we use this tool, right? How do we keep it fresh? How do we keep it in the forefront? Because we know life is demanding, right? And so there's lots of spaces where this can easily be a good idea that sort of gets pushed to the side. And my hope is that we find some practical ways to keep it in the forefront and make it a useful tool for support. So that's where my intention is, what I'm kind of coming from today. As Hazel said, put any questions you have in the chat. We're going to be a small group, so there should be plenty of time for questions that pop up. Please feel free to put those in or comments. If there's something, that kind of strikes you around your particular situation, you want to share with the group, feel free to use the chat in that way, because we also know how important community is, right? When we're doing caregiving, it's easy to feel isolated. So we want this to be a space of community as well. All right, so let's dive right on into this. So why are we kind of referring to this, or is this referred to as a Bill of Rights? This isn't just something, Hazel has come up with on her own. She has many brilliant ideas, but this is a bigger kind of national trend. And so this idea of a Care Partner Bill of Rights is this personal reminder that caring for someone does not require us to give up ourselves. It names our needs, our boundaries, some of those permissions we may need, ways to honor ourselves as we care for another person. So this is not meant to be at the expense of our loved one that we're supporting, but it is meant to also provide maybe a space at the table for us too. We also are humans with needs, and when those needs get met in a fulfilling and compassionate way, we're able to step into that caregiving role with a little more balance. So a Bill of Rights is going to create some space, and we're going to go through that worksheet and kind of break this down a little bit. But these ideas of like, what am I allowed to need? What can I say no to? What do I need to kind of preserve for myself? What permissions I need to give myself? So you might notice, for you, some of those areas might feel really easy. It might feel like, yeah, I can give myself permission to do things all day long. That's an easy thing for me, and I know that it's good for me. And like, that's not the part I struggle with. I struggle with the telling somebody else I actually need their help on this date at this time, right? So everybody's like experience of this might look a little bit different. So again, some of these might resonate a little bit more with you. That's fine. Like lean into the parts of this that feel most relevant for you and your situation. This idea is, that this is not about caring less. It's not about stepping away from that responsibility. It's knowing that our well-being also matters in this caregiving relationship. It's this commitment to ourselves. And that's really how I want us to sort of let it settle in with us in our time together. All right, so I wanted to start with, and y'all bear with me. Okay, yeah, my screen's covered up a little bit there. There we go. So I wanted to start with just two sample ones. These, I'm not going to read through all of these. This slide and the next one are just going to show us two samples and just kind of skim over this, just get an idea of maybe some familiarity with maybe the language they're using or the types of things folks hone in on. I think, this as a concept is a little bit new. It was new to me a few months ago as I was starting to learn about this and sort of wrap my head around how does this fit into the bigger sort of care plan. So look at sort of how one person has sort of crafted theirs and what that looks like. And you'll see there, this one I think kind of hones in. I've got 6 on that's on here. There's not a set number. There's not a set way we have to do that. But I think the more specific we can find ourselves getting as we start brainstorming individually, the more effective it's going to feel as we're able to name some things. So again, here's one example. Let's look at the next example. So in this one is a little wordier, right? And I really picked these two because they just give you two different options or two different ways people have approached this. That first one was a little bit less wordy, it's a little more direct. This one has a little more wording to it. I think, again, to me, the process of doing this and claiming sort of how you feel and what's important to you, that is part of what I think is a benefit of doing this. And so being able, if it feels like, yeah, I want to write kind of a paragraph in response to this one question, or I want to write a little bit more, or really line out what does this mean to me? I think that can be a therapeutically really beneficial way to approach it. If it feels like, no, I can kind of hone in and it's, I need to ask for this one thing and this is exactly what it is. Again, making it so that it works for you to me is the most important sort of approach to this. So you've seen a couple of different ways they've done this. Again, different types of things they've honed in on, wording they've used in these examples. All right, so now we are going to start interacting with our worksheet. So if you've had a chance to print out the worksheet, I would encourage you to get that out and have it available to you. If you didn't get a chance to practice with that, or not practice with it, sorry. If you didn't get a chance to print it, what I'm trying to say, then just have a sheet of paper or make a note on your phone. There's something where you can capture some things, because I really want us to start kind of breaking the ice and writing down some answers to some stuff. As we do this over the next few questions, we are not going to come up with some like perfect plan at the end of this 30 minutes. Y'all, I wish I had that much like power and time and ability to lead us through an activity. But what I'm hoping we're going to do is for each question, I want you to challenge yourself to write at least one answer, at least one thing kind of in each of these areas. Okay. So when we think about this, I need permission to, you may or may not need those permissions. Those are just some examples that are there. But if there's an answer to that question of I need permission to, what is something maybe you need to claim there? What's something that comes to mind when you think about that? Giving yourself permission to do this thing. What's something maybe you want to stop feeling guilty about? As we go through this, excuse me, I think I highlight this later in one of the slides. As we go through this, we may notice some of these things we're actually doing for ourselves to take care of ourselves, but it's coming with tremendous guilt, right? We're feeling a lot of internal resistance. Yeah, I take a break and go, see my friends, one night a week, but boy, I feel so guilty that I leave mom or that I do this other thing. So we might be doing a thing, but it might be coming with some heavy emotion, right? Or we might find that we're not doing it at all. So is there something that I want to stop feeling guilty about as I'm kind of thinking through what those needs are? What's something I wish that someone would tell me is okay? I think this can be a real tender one for us, right? It might just be that reassurance. It's okay that you go out and see your friends. It's okay that you and your partner, go out to dinner. It's okay that you're tired and don't want to talk to your mom after your full day of work, right? Things that you wish you could hear that were okay. How we do that, where we get that, that's not what this part of the plan is for. We're going to talk about what to do with this at the end, but thinking about what our needs are. Okay. So at least in one of those three, I'm encouraging you to break that ice and write something down for yourself. This is a draft, right? This is our first shot at trying to capture some of these things. Okay. Let's look at the next one here. I know this workshop, from my understanding from Hazel, is part of a bigger kind of boundaries series and sort of approach that she's kind of working on with you all. And I think boundaries across the board in all types of relationships are one of the kind of cornerstones. I think it's an area that I see a whole lot of folks struggle with, even when I would objectively say they're really good at setting boundaries. They're often not fun. They can feel intimidating. We don't know how to do it. We're scared to do it. So it comes with a lot of baggage for a whole lot of us. So we know that it can be hard sometimes to identify like what's the boundary. I think that can be a little bit overwhelming. But sometimes trying to answer these questions let us know where we might need a boundary. Okay. So again, not getting caught up in how we're going to set it or how we're going to maintain it, right? We're not trying to talk ourselves out of it. I can't be responsible for, maybe the answer is I can't be responsible for every one of, mom's medical appointments. I don't want to talk myself out of it by saying, but who's going to do it and how, I know my brother's not going to show up or whatever the answer is. This is for claiming what the need is, right? So I can't be responsible for. I'm allowed to say no to. I need help with something I'm doing now that may not be sustainable. You may be dealing with your own health challenges. You may be dealing with exhausting all your time off work, trying to figure out what maybe even I'm doing that I can't always keep doing. And then the last one that I bolded there, and again, with this one, I'm going to ask you to look for one spot that you can break the ice. If you've got a bunch of answers, capture them. You all write them down, get them in there, like capture the words, even if it's not a fully formed thought. Okay. But as you're kind of thinking about that, I want to speak to this last one that's on the list here. This idea of I need more of something and less of something. This is an approach that I use a whole lot with my individual clients. As Hazel mentioned, I provide individual therapy. Our contact information will be at the end of the slides. You're going to get all of the slides and all this information, so you'll have this. But one of the things that I do often with my clients is I talk about this idea of kind of recalibrating something in life, whatever the thing is we're talking about. And I think it's much easier to kind of capture that idea of I need a little more of this or a little less of this, as opposed to sort of these big changes, right? I never want to do this again, or I need to start doing this all the time everywhere. Those kind of big swings and changes just take a lot of energy. It's overwhelming for a lot of us, especially in caregiving chapters of life, right? When our plate is already very full and we're trying to think about how to be this whole new me, right, in the next 24 hours. Most of us are going to feel like we fall short, right? I can't do everything right in all the ways. But if I approach it through this lens of what do I need a little more of or a little less of, right? It gives me more of a bite-sized approach. What am I trying to kind of move myself toward? And then I'm not beating myself up that I didn't capture it in all the ways, right? Maybe I'm needing more exercise and movement in my life, right? And I realize that's fallen off during my caregiving. Well, if I'm going for this all or nothing approach, right? And every single day I've got to be out there getting my steps in and doing all these things, I may or may not be able to capture that goal. And if I don't, for many of us, that can be really the start of a negative spiral, right? I'm really beating myself up. I'm really feeling like I'm missing the mark on all these things that I know are important. If I can shift that more to, I need more movement, I need less, sedentary time. I need less ruminating in front of my phone or computer, right? I can much more likely capture that. I can move toward that in a more effective way. So if this feels like a harder one to kind of capture, if some of those boundaries feel like, this just feels too big, right? Try looking at that last one. If that may be a more comfortable place to kind of start out and to sort of build some of those boundary skills around. Certainly, if working on boundaries is something that you all need some support around, that's a good space to come talk to somebody like me. We've got lots of folks in our office who meet with folks individually about this. My colleague Kim and I have done whole programs around boundaries in particular. So there's a lot of support that we can give around that area if that feels like one of those that you've struggled with. All right, let's go on to the next question, to number 3. So what parts of me still belong to me, right? As a care partner, you've got the right to all of these joyful things in your life, right? Joy and privacy and friendships and work and sexuality and hobbies and travel and solitude, right? All of the stuff. You've still got the right to a full life. I realize we're trying to balance that in the mix of a whole lot of demands and a lot of shifting landscapes, right? Those caregiving demands can erode, they can. Oh, sorry, I was reading my slide there and got caught up in my wording. What I was saying there is the caregiving demands can erode the time and attention we're able to give to these other parts of life. A lot of times we don't recognize it. It's just kind of small things. I don't go to this thing anymore. I don't do this as frequently as I used to. I've stopped, meeting my friends for this, standing, dinner night or whatever. And it's often not one big swing, but it's lots of small ways that it gets eroded. So again, looking for at least one question, one thing here where it kind of brings something to mind. While I'm a caregiver, I am still blank, right? I'm still a partner. I'm still a mom. I'm still a, hobby, person, painter, whatever I'm doing. I have the right to continue, whatever. Something I don't want caregiving to take away from me is I'm allowed to look forward to something. I think caregiving can often put us in a space where we're on hold in a lot of ways, right? We don't know if we can make plans down the road. I don't know in 3 months if so and so is going to be okay or what's going to be happening. And so it's easy to put a whole lot of things on hold if they can be put on hold, right? So often what we're doing is we're attuning to the person that we're providing care for, things that we can sort of absorb. I'm disappointed I'm not going to my book club, but I can handle that or I can do it. Those sometimes start to erode or we start to lose track. This last one I actually forgot to put on the handout before I did it, and I was thinking about this after I sent the handout to Hazel. And I also wanted to include this piece because it may be relevant for some of us. I want to protect my relationship with fill in the blank. I know I'm the parent of a 26-year-old son. I'm caring for my mom. It can be easy sometimes in the day to day for me to think, oh, he's good, right? He's a grown up. He's out there doing things with his, fiance or doing his own thing. Mom needs my attention. Mom needs my time. But am I being uneven sort of in how I'm approaching those relationships? So is there a space or a relationship that you need to protect in some ways? Because it may be easy to erode some of that attention we give to it. So again, looking for one thing we can put in this area. All right. And so now shifting into sort of building this Bill of Rights, like how we actually do this. These may be things, like I said earlier, these may be things that you're doing, but you're feeling a lot of guilt with, or you're feeling some kind of internal resistance. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this in some way. They may also be kind of pointing us towards some areas that need some attention or need some change or attunement. Anytime with any mental health, kind of any mental wellness work that we're doing, being able to identify our needs, name our needs, even for ourselves, right? Like it's nice when someone else recognizes it, but even being able to do this for ourselves, right? I have the right to this. I need this. I want more of this in my life. It helps us feel seen. It helps us kind of make space for more positive connection, whether that's with ourselves or with other people. I think it's very easy to make ourselves smaller during this chapter of life. And often, I think when resources are short, and when I'm talking resources, I'm talking time, energy, money. When those things are running short, we often are the one that kind of gets the short end of the stick, right? I can handle not getting this thing I'd like to do because so and so has something they really need, right? And sometimes in some of those moments that may be true, right? I've certainly had that experience myself. But I think if that's our default, if we're always getting kind of us getting pushed off the list, we're going to feel that show up often as resentment. It's going to come out in passive aggressive ways, right? All sorts of things. So as we're able to take care of ourselves and name those needs, we're able to see ourselves, we're able to claim some space. It lets us show up in our caregiving in the way we want to. Um, so I think when you think about the sort of my rights section, right, as we're looking at this, is there something in there that you can add one thing to? And again, if you get hit with many ideas, then absolutely go ahead and add those in, right? And think about the ways you begin. I gave some kind of sentence stems here. Some of those might feel more comfortable than others for you, right? It might feel like a more, I don't know, maybe a softer or more inclusive boundary to go with. I can love someone and still need time alone, right? I'm not responsible for every financial decision related to my parents. I give myself permission to have a bad day and call a friend and gripe and let myself reset. Right? Think about those sentence beginnings. Those are just to help kind of get that ball turning a little bit. And again, if we can get more than one on the page, that's great. This is a draft. This is a break the ice. This does not have to be a permanent, forever way that you kind of word this or look at it. But just getting started, that's really our goal today. Okay, let's look at our next one. I think as we go through these, actually, I'm going to go back for 1 second. And Hazel, is there anything in the chat? I know that I can't see that part, but I feel like this is a natural kind of shifting space because we're going to talk about maintaining this. Is there anything in the chat that we would need to address at this point,
There
or any
hasn't been
questions
any,
you want?
not at this point.
Okay,
I'm, I think it's wonderful what you're doing. It's just
great.
great.
That's fine. Just making sure. I didn't want to leave something out if somebody had a question at that point, just because I know I'm going to turn into the next sort of window for this. So let's shift now into how do we sort of make and keep this commitment? I put those reflection questions in the handout. We're not going to go through all of those in a lot of detail in this window. We just don't have the time necessarily for that. These are ones though that I'm going to touch on a little bit, and I want you to really let yourself sit with whether this is sort of today, whether that's letting this sort of sit with you for a few days and maybe coming back to it, over the weekend or giving yourself a chance to sort of percolate on this and then look back over it. So being able to kind of look at some of those reflection questions, it can really help us, or my intention was that this was to help us be able to anticipate and prepare for internal and external resistance. All right. So y'all, that's just a whole lot of therapy words to say. You're going to be trying to do something different, and there's part of you that's going to push back on that. And there's really likely people in your circle that are going to push back on that. And I'm just being real. Right? If you are taking on a significant part of caregiving and you are starting to disrupt that card in some way by saying, I'm not doing all of this, I can't do all of that. I need someone else to step into here. We're going to get some resistance, right? Like that is just going to happen. And I think the more we can embrace that, right? This is just part of it. Change comes with that. That doesn't mean anything even negative necessarily about any of the folks we're having this happen with. I can love my relatives, and I can also have frustration that they're not stepping up in the way that I've asked them to step up, right? So like this is complicated stuff. That's what we're talking about. But I think as we do some of these kind of reflection questions, that thought is that we're giving ourselves kind of a landing space. Okay. When I feel that resistance, here's what I want to say to myself. When I come across it, in someone else, here's how I want to approach that. It also helps us sort of get back on track after we have disruptive periods. So I think, before I started, I was talking with Hazel a little bit about how I sort of think about some of this. And I think a lot of these goals for me, I frame as my own kind of North Star goals. And it might be that that is where I'm attuned to, taking time for myself, having more balance, having more shared responsibility. Those might be things that I've identified and I'm working toward. But there might be periods where I get off track from that, right? Somebody has something, my person I'm caring for has something flare up and they are in the hospital for a few days and things are really kind of turned upside down because of some acute things going on. I'm not going to be able to keep to my plan in the same way. And I think expecting myself to do that is going to, again, set myself up for a spiral of why can't I handle all the things perfectly? So being able to acknowledge sometimes things are going to get off track. Sometimes we're going to travel or somebody's going to come visit somebody's going to get sick. Something is going to make it happen. We're going to have holidays and we're going to get off track with some of those routines or plans that kind of keep some of that stuff in order. And so having thought through how we deal with resistance or how we come back on track, it really helps us kind of recapture that bigger goal that we've got. That idea of sharing with another person, that's one of the questions I've got on there is there someone I can share this with? And I will acknowledge, like for some of us, maybe not, right? Maybe not. I would encourage that if you've met other people in this caregiving space, whether you come to like some of Hazel's support groups or some of the programs here, it may be people within this kind of community that you can share it with. Maybe it's not, maybe it doesn't feel safe to share it with certain family members or friends. But if we are able to share it with someone else, it does a couple of things. One, it gives us just some accountability, right? Even just being able to say to a friend, "Hey, I went to this program over lunch and we talked about this thing, and I'd never heard of this, care partner bill of rights, and I'm starting to kind of decide I might need to like make space for this, this, and this," right? You're not asking them to manage that for you, but you're just saying out loud, I'm trying to take care of myself differently, right? I'm trying to handle kind of this phase of life a little bit differently. And just making that claim to another person who cares about you, it also gives them a chance to support you in that. If we're sharing it with somebody who cares about us, they're probably going to say, like, good job, and I'm glad you're doing this and you deserve this, right? That helps reinforce that message. Keeping in mind that we want this to be a living document, our needs are going to change, right? Caregiving for my mom looks different today than it did when she first moved in with us, right? And so I've got to kind of change and adapt along the way. And it's easy just to get stuck in routines. I think for many of us, if we capture something that works, we don't want to lose that. But sometimes we've got to kind of come back to the drawing board and kind of shift things around a little bit. So again, if that feels like something that you run into at some points, that's a good time to talk with Hazel. Come talk to me, check in with somebody else if that helps you kind of get through that hump. And then we've got a space on there for the signature, which I really love. This was Hazel's idea to add that piece in. And I think it shows, let me think how to say this. It lets us put some meaning into it so that we are able to see that as a commitment to ourselves, right? When you sign this, if you print this out and write it out, sign it with intention. Sign it as a commitment to yourself, a commitment to make space for yourself in your own life, right? Because it's easy to kind of to lose track of that. When we look about, let's see, oops, there we go. When we look about this, let's see, I think I've already touched on some of these. Y'all got ahead of myself in my slides. Let me skim through here and see what I've not mentioned. I think one thing that can help us there is looking is there anything that I've identified that feels especially urgent or stands out among other things? So that might be things that have maybe a bigger health consequence for you. Maybe you're seeing some impact on not getting enough sleep, not eating the way that you want to, not moving your body the way you want to, not connecting with other people. What of the sort of pool of thoughts around this feels a little more urgent or feels a little bit more like it needs to lead the way? I think it can also help to think about what can I realistically start with? I may be working toward a goal. I'll tell you my goal. I'll share my very own unique one here. I have been working toward a trip. I had not traveled out of town with my partner in 4 years, I think. And so I have a trip on the horizon. In a few weeks, I'm going to be going out of town for almost 2 weeks. And it took a lot of planning and a lot of coordination to make that happen. But that was something that really stood out to me, right? And so I was able to work on that long term. I wasn't going to get there in day one. I wasn't going to make plans for that trip. That took me months to coordinate. What is something we start with, right? Where do I start? Giving ourselves some low hanging fruit. What's a small thing I can bring back in? Can I bring a hobby back in? Can I make space for reading? Can I do a FaceTime with a friend? Any starting space, because that helps us build that momentum. We might have those bigger, longer goals we're working toward. I hope we do. But putting that pressure on ourselves to get everything in order immediately, again, it's putting us toward that spiral. It's going to send us down that spiral pretty quickly. When is a time I can regularly check in with myself about these needs? I have two suggestions around that. One is I'm a huge fan of if you do a Monday through Friday schedule, if you've got a different work schedule, make it fit for those days. But for an example is if you've got a Monday through Friday schedule, having that Sunday reset as you're getting ready for the week, having this be part of that, right? How am I taking care of myself this week? How am I kind of holding to my intention around this care partner bill of rights? Am I taking that step that I said that I really wanted to start taking? So just having a space that we can plug that in on a kind of a weekly basis. So we're bringing it in. You're not going to do all things every day, right? We know that, but somewhere that we bring that in to check in. The other time that I would say is again, after a disruption. If you've had travel, if you've had visitors, if somebody's been sick, we've gotten out of routine for some reason, coming back to that is kind of a foundational kind of piece that we use as a check-in. Let's see. Is there someone I can use as that accountability support partner? We talked about that a little early. We don't have to be, when we have an accountability partner, in our friend circle, they don't have to be working on the same thing as us, right? They can be working on their weight loss journey. And you're like, oh, how's that going? And they're like, yeah, how's your caregiving going? Like we can be supporting each other in various ways. But if we have someone we can trust in that way, it really helps keep that momentum going. Let's see. And then how can I keep this as a supportive reminder? So having it printed out is great if that works for you, but also things like a kind of a mini note in your phone, just kind of bringing those rights out that you come up with and having some notes in there, having some visual representation. So I'm a big fan of some little clip art or some piece that you've packed meaning into, right? When I see this thing, it means this, and it reminds me of that. Kind of those check-in reminders on the calendar. So put it on your calendar, put a weekly check-in with yourself or a monthly check-in. So you're coming back to this and sort of making sure you're staying in alignment with that intention. I really love this quote from Brene Brown. She's one of my favorite sort of motivational people that's out there. She really hones in on this idea of choosing short-term discomfort over long-term resentment. It can be hard to do some of these things, right? Some boundaries we have and some of the limits we have may be external, right? We're saying to somebody, I need your help with this, or I can't do this thing anymore. Some of these may be internal. It may be just knowing, yeah, internally, I know if this happens, here's how I'm going to respond, right? Or I'm not going to be the first one to volunteer for this. So we can do those things where we sort of set those boundaries, kind of in place again, either externally or internally. But I think sometimes that guilt can come in, right? We can feel like we're rejecting people. We can feel like those boundaries are at the expense of others. And I just want to confront that notion with this quote from Brene Brown that I think really hits it on the head, right? Compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment. This is what we're shooting for, right? And I would say for me, this is my North Star. I don't hit it every day. There's days where I feel petty and I feel short and I'm snippy. But when I can get balanced, when I can get my needs met, this is what I'm trying to work toward for myself. Okay. So a couple of these last slides, you'll be getting all these materials. Here are some indicators maybe that you may need some additional support. If you're feeling a lot of these things coming up where this load is feeling especially heavy, coming to talk with me or one of my partners in this area, using insurance to tap into other therapy resources, checking in with Hazel or other parts of the wellness team. There's a lot of support that's available and wants to kind of give you support. But it may be a sign if these are popping up that you need a little bit more kind of active support in your circle. This is our team of 4 therapists. These are our 4 full-time therapists, and we've also got some contract folks that we work with. So we've got a large team you can draw from if you're interested. This is our information. We are located in Breckenridge Hall, and then this also shows how you can book with us, and all of our information is online. We do a mix of in-person and telehealth services, and all employees are eligible for 5 free visits to our office. And with that, I will stop and leave space for questions.
Rhonda, this is fantastic. It's just
Thank you.
really wonderful, and I love the way you've guided us through it. One of the things too that I think is important to keep in mind is that the people we're caring for, the more we do for them that they're able to do for themselves, just adds to our sense of, a burden that
Abs-
really isn't necessary. I mean, I think the idea is to try and help them continue to do as much for themselves as they can.
Absolutely.
And we may be thinking that they expect we're going to do it all, but they may not be thinking you need to do that. So I think it's kind of important to keep that side of the um, relationship in perspective as well.
I totally agree. And Hazel, that makes me think of another point. I don't think I added this in earlier, but I think sometimes, our as the care partner, our own circle of support, our friends and family that are trying to be there to support us in our caregiving role, I think sometimes they sort of assume that we know how much they're there for us. They assume that like, well, of course I support you, or of course I, would show up here. And I think sometimes like we have to let them know, like, no, I need some more active support. I need to hear those things. I need some overt, I need you to tell me these things, or I need to be able to ask you for this. And I think sometimes even again, our most well-meaning, loving folks, life gets busy, right? They gets pulled off into their own direction. They get pulled into their own demands. And we know that that can be easy to sort of feel overlooked in that space. So being able to have an avenue to speak up and to ask for what we need can just be really helpful.
I agree. And I think it's also important, especially maybe for newer caregivers, as you identify things that would be helpful if someone could do them, keep that list so that when
Yes,
someone asks, you can say, this is
yes,
something instead of, no, I'm fine. I mean, I think people generally would help, But
No,
if you don't know what would be a helpful thing, then you're just likely to say, no, I appreciate it, but I don't need
I
the
agree.
help. So
I agree.
keeping that kind of list going, I think is a good idea.
I agree. And I think the Care Partner Bill of Rights to me fits so well with that because it really is about slowing down, stepping back for a second, thinking about, again, those bigger pieces, right? What do I need? Again, I realize that there's a lot of questions about how do I do it? How do I have a conversation? How do I do those next pieces? But I think this is such the good like foundation to really be able to be in alignment, right, with what our needs actually are.
I think the other thing too is that, when you start into caregiving, if you knew how long the road was or how far the journey was going to go, you
Yeah,
might think about dispensing your energy a little bit differently because, you've got to make it last over the long haul.
very
Um,
good point.
we tend to pour it all out, you know, right from the get-go and then deplete it, and we've got a long way to go. So this
Good
caregiver
point.
Bill of Rights, I think, really might help even an early on caregiver
Yeah.
kind of keeping things, um, you know, in a reasonable way to manage the demands and the needs and all of that and not lose themselves in it.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and thank you once again, Rhonda, for this. I think it's fantastic. We will have the recording available on YouTube, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today. And again, give this some thought, and maybe you'll find a new tool to help you navigate your journey as you're working your way through caregiving. So thank you, everyone.